Yabaseo, all my beautiful people. How are you doing today? And welcome to the alternate point of view. My name is Tracy Lee. I want to welcome everyone who is new to this channel and all of my OG supporters. Welcome back. I apologize, first of all, that we did not do a live today. Unfortunately, I did not make it, as you obviously know. I apologize. Unfortunately, something came up. Sorry. But what we are doing, because I am so super obsessed with Samantha Woll and her deletion from this world, is going over back through the trial, piece by piece, witness by witness, because I want to go over everything that was said and that wasn't said. I want to hear from prosecution opening arguments all the way to the very, very end. Closing arguments, to everything the judge said, to sentencing, to all of it, because there is some very important tidbits of information in the trial that we are going to discover once I finally get any information from Detroit, which I have learned through some sources will take forever, because Wayne County takes forever, and so does Michigan. So, based on some work that I have done with my own investigating, obviously you all have seen my series. If you have not, please check out Murder on Joliet Place, the series. I am going to make that much more crisp and clean and into a podcast, but I also am trying to wait until I get more information about the case from the police station and the detectives and Wayne County Prosecutor Office. But what I want to do is go over the trial piece by piece. I know I have another amazing YouTuber out there, Leah Larson, who is working on this as well. She's been doing her own investigating, and I appreciate her so much. Thanks to one of my subscribers, Kirsten, who reached out to Leah to have her do her own investigating, and she's done an amazing job, and she's making a video series as well. So I think between the two of us, we are going to be able to come up with some pretty good answers for this case. So that being said, let's dig into the opening statement from the prosecutor on this case. His name is Ryan Elsey, and he is, just so you know, no longer a prosecutor for Wayne County. He has moved on to the DOJ. I'm sure you're aware. I think I've said that in one of my other videos. It's quite suspicious that he is not a Wayne County prosecutor anymore, and he is now working for the DOJ. But that's neither here nor there at this moment. We are going to watch his opening statement, and I am going to interrupt quite a bit because we've already seen the trial. We already know the outcome. I want to interrupt because I want to point out some things that he says in his opening statement that are going to be like, that makes sense, or that doesn't make sense, or why didn't the jury hear this or think about this now that we know all of the things that have come out? Because remember, if I need to remind you all, that at the time of Samantha's going away, the prosecutor's office, the police department, everyone put out statements. Now, mind you, they were very vague statements. Now, from what I understand from Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, they don't give out any information. They are very, very vague. They are very hush-hush. They don't ask much from the community for help at all. So that's why I find it very hard to believe that Wayne County is at all involved in the community, or that their police department is at all involved in the community. I find it very hard to believe when I see these campaign ads with the Attorney General or Slotkin or any of these people that are running for office in Michigan and Detroit or anywhere there, that they are in touch or in contact or anywhere near the people of Michigan, because they are not. They are all fake. They're all liars, and they're politicians. What can you say? but they are not making connections with the community. They are not reaching out to the community for information. They won't give any information that they have. They're not transparent by any means. So all of this hoopla about, cops being transparent, releasing body cam footage, and all this kind of shenanigans, they don't do that there. They don't say, hey, we have this information. We're going to put this out there. If you recognize this person, give us a call. They don't do that. They're very holding all that stuff close to their chest. Okay. So that's exactly what they did with this situation. So at the beginning, they thought that this was a possible anti-Semitic situation. They thought this could possibly be, due to the Hamas-Israel attack that happened 2 weeks prior. Remember, Samantha Woll, the incident happened on October 21st, 2023, and the Hamas-Israel situation happened October 7th, 2023. So it was literally 2 weeks, and Samantha Woll was the president of the Jewish synagogue, the Isaac Agree downtown synagogue there in Detroit. And Samantha Woll also, let's not forget, was very involved in the Dana Nessel campaign, the Elisa Slotkin campaign, the Chain campaign, all Democrat women. And all of these women are in office. Like, all of these women are boosted up and put into office. And Samantha Woll has a lot to do with all of these things. So she was very involved in campaigning, raising money, putting these women in these powerful positions, and also raising money for the synagogue, which has now gone from complete deterioration to one of the, wealthiest synagogues and the only freestanding remaining synagogue in downtown Detroit. So where is all of this going, you ask? I ask the same thing. But here's the thing. The police and the prosecutor's office said within the first 48 hours, okay, that they had a suspect that they weren't ready to name yet or tell the relationship between Samantha and said suspect. So they seem to feel as if they had this case pretty buttoned up, right? They seem to feel like they had it all done. That's why they didn't need anyone's help from the community. That's why they felt it wasn't an anti-Semitic crime, because they already had this all done, buttoned up in a bow. They were ready to go. And they just weren't ready to give that information out to the public. But then, they weren't. So what happened? What changed? So we're going to listen to Ryan Elsie's opening statement, and we're going to find out what changed. How did this all come to fruition for Michael Jackson Bolanos, a complete, total stranger to Samantha Woll, is going to suddenly be involved in this crime? Now, I don't know if you guys remember in Detroit, a very prominent neurosurgeon, Dr. Devon, I can't think of his last name right offhand, but he was also deleted. And the person that did that to him was someone that he knew. I mean, again, Samantha Woll, they thought it was someone that she knew. They kept stressing the fact that the neighborhood had nothing to worry about, that it was no forced entry, that there wasn't some rando person walking the streets, going out, taking out people in Detroit. So this goes on for a couple of months, right? They're telling people, no need to worry. This is clearly someone that she knew. That's the insinuation, because they felt they already had a suspect they were locking down on. But then suddenly enters Michael Jackson Bolanos, who is a rando person that is walking the streets. But yet you just told everybody that this is nothing for Detroit to worry about, and you don't need anyone in Detroit's help to find this rando person walking the streets. So let's get into checking out this prosecution opening argument. And I want to do this because it makes sense when you listen to his opening argument how absolutely it doesn't make sense when you listen to his opening argument, if that makes any sense. So let's hear Ryan Elsey, and this is Ryan Elsey right here, who is no longer a prosecutor for Wayne County. He now works for the Department of Justice. This was his final case. He needed to get this win, but he didn't. I don't think it was guaranteed that if he got the win, he got the job at the DOJ. He had the job at the DOJ before he went into this case. So he had a cushy job waiting on him anyway. So let's listen to Ryan Elsey.
And this case is about one such person, a person who you will see on one particular night prowled through our community looking for opportunities to go into spaces that weren't his to go into and to take things that were not his to take. And the most important thing that he ended up taking that night was the life of a woman named Samantha Woll, who you will hear was a somewhat prominent member of our community, the president of the downtown synagogue. And on the very last night of her life, on a night when someone was lurking in her neighborhood, she left her front door open. She gave him an opportunity to take from her. And that mistake turned out to be tragic because at her home, at a place where she was supposed to be safe, she was stabbed to death.
Okay, so I just want to point out that he literally blamed the victim right there, that she left her door open so that some rando person could come in and take her out. And it was a mistake that she made. So he starts off the bat blaming her. So it's her fault that she left her door open and gave some random person an opportunity to come into her house and take her out. So note his argument is completely wrong from jump. Like, if you're on a jury and you're sitting there and you're listening to this opening argument, are you literally sitting there blaming the victim? I mean, how does that look good for you or the defendant?
And the evidence in this case is going to show you that the man who did this to her is this man right here, the defendant, Michael Jackson Bolanos. They didn't catch him until close to 6 weeks after her death. But when they did, he still had her blood on a jacket that he wore that night and on a backpack that he wore that night. Now, I want to walk you through the evidence that you're going to see and hear throughout this case, but I want to frame some expectations and some understanding up front, because when Samantha Woll's body was found outside of her home on October 21st, 2023, her death was a mystery at that time with very few leads. And you're going to see that this case was investigated by something called the Homicide Task Force, which includes homicide detectives from the Detroit Police Department, investigators from the Michigan State Police, and personnel from the FBI who worked together to identify Samantha Woll's killer. And part of what you're going to see in this case is the many steps that were taken in this investigation to show you that this was an investigation that started out very open-ended at first, with other suspects, other persons of interest looked at. And the investigation used cutting-edge investigative techniques, including forensic data from various sources, including forensic science, to zero in on the defendant. And I want to caution you, the presentation of this sort of forensic data, it's not splashy. Despite the camera that you're going to see in the courtroom throughout the trial, it shouldn't be dramatic. It's tedious. It's time intensive. which is why this trial is going to last so long. So I'm going to ask for your patience throughout this process. And that's especially so because for the first few days of the trial, you're not going to see any evidence even directly implicating the defendant. Instead, we're going to show you the same evidence that investigators had to work with at the early part of this investigation, the same clues that they had, the same limitations that confronted them, and the same foundation of evidence that was ultimately put into place that led them to the defendant.
Okay, so even right there, he says, you are not going to hear any evidence that directly links the defendant to this crime. You are going to see the tediousness that they had to go through to connect this defendant to this crime. So you have to see all the work that they had to do in order to link Michael Jackson Villanos to this crime. All the time they wasted. So listen to the words he's not saying and to the words he is saying. He's literally telling you there is no evidence that links Michael Jackson Villanos to this crime. They had zero evidence, but they had to piece together evidence through data to make him be at the scene. That's what they're doing. They are literally piecing together evidence to put Michael Jackson Villanos, who was not even a thought in their head for this. Not even a thought. He's telling you that they went through several suspects before Michael Jackson Villanos, and they just pushed those people aside and found Michael Jackson Villanos and his cell phone data in the area. How convenient that they found him, because Michael Jackson Villanos does have a record. And they were like, yep, that's the guy. But he literally says to the jury, you will not hear any evidence that links the defendant to the scene. That's a stark opening statement. A very, very telling opening statement. When you A, blame the victim, and B, literally say, you will see no evidence that links the defendant to the crime. That right there should tell you that this should have never gone to trial.
Now, Samantha Woll lived in the Lafayette Park neighborhood of Detroit, just across the I-375 freeway from this courthouse. And she lived in a community of townhomes. And on October 21st of 2023, at about 6:20 a.m., one of her neighbors found her body outside. She was outside of a unit right next to hers, 1368 Joliet Place. She was bloody. She was barefoot. She was cold to the touch at that time. When the police arrived, they found a trail of blood that led from her body to her townhome at 1366 Joliet Place. There was blood on the door. Inside the hallway leading to the living room, there was blood on the floor. There was blood smeared on the walls. Inside the living room, there was more blood. Pillows and blanket on the floor. Her contact lenses on the floor, suggesting she had been asleep before this attack happened. And when the police started to investigate her activities leading up to this night, they found that she went to a wedding in Sterling Heights that night and got home at about 12:30 a.m. And the police got a hold of her cell phone, which was found near her couch, and they performed something called a forensic extraction on that phone. They got all the data that they could on that phone so they could analyze it and try to see what her activities were leading up to her death. And they found a couple of important things. First, they found that her last outgoing text message was at 1:02 a.m. She simply sent a heart emoji to one of her friends. Second, they found that her phone was last unlocked between 1:29 and 1:35 a.m. That would have been the last time something necessarily requiring human input into her phone would have had to have happened. Her phone was passcode locked. So that narrowed the suspected time range of her murder between when her phone was last used to 6:20 a.m. Now, the police also found that she had an ADT system at her home, an alarm system. And there were sensors for that system. There was one by the front door. There was one attached to the back door. There was one attached to a basement door that led to a common hallway shared by other units in the building. And there was a motion sensor in her living room. And the police went to ADT and they used a search warrant to get data from that system to see if there was any information they could get about the system's activities the night of her death. And what they found was that although the ADT system wasn't armed that night, the system was still collecting data. And they found that at 12:31 a.m., her front door opened, consistent with her getting back from the wedding. They found that at 12:32 a.m., there was motion present in her living room. At 12:35 a.m. until 12:38 a.m., her back door briefly opened and then shut. And when police arrived, they found that the door had been shut and it was in the locked position when they arrived. At 1:01 a.m., there was a message in the data indicating that the front door was still open, and there's no indication that the front door ever closed that night. At 1:24 a.m., there's an indication in the data that that living room motion sensor was idle, meaning it wasn't detecting any more activity inside the living room at that time, any more motion. The next time that activity was detected, the next time motion was detected in the living room was at 4:20 a.m. And the system was idle again at 4:22 a.m. So that naturally made 4:20 an important time in this overall timeline, because that was the last time motion was detected in her living room after she stopped using her phone. Now, the police went back to the scene a couple of weeks later and they tested the ADT system and they pulled another data set to try to see whether the system was working and to see whether the times were accurate. And they found that the times that were in the data were accurate within about 12 seconds of real time. You're going to hear that an autopsy ultimately concluded that Samantha Woll died of a total of 8 stab wounds. All of the wounds were concentrated at her shoulders and above, focused on her neck and her head. This is the general information that investigators had to work with at the outset of the investigation. But there were limitations. There wasn't a video inside of Miss Woll's home that showed what happened. They looked for videos of other townhomes in that area to see if they could find anything capturing who came and went that night, but they couldn't find anything. They canvassed the neighborhood for eyewitnesses to see if anybody heard or saw anything relevant that night, and they didn't find anything. The closest thing they found was, you'll hear from one of the neighbors who will tell you that he heard what he describes as a woman's voice at around 1:24 a.m., but it sounded to him like an older woman's voice and nothing violent. Now, there was a lot of blood at the scene, but that blood, to the extent it was tested, was identified as Miss Woll's blood. There were some fingerprints left at the scene, mostly in blood on the walls. And you're going to hear that many of those prints were not of sufficient quality to be analyzed to identify someone, and those that were came back to be Miss Woll's. There were footprints in the blood on the ground, but the footprints were bare footprints, suspected of being hers. The police talked to people at the wedding that she went to, but they couldn't find anything suspicious that had happened that night. They talked to dozens and dozens of people, friends, colleagues, family members, current, former romantic interests, but they couldn't find anything alarming or actionable. They couldn't find anything that led them to a true suspect. Now, the first major potential break in this investigation happened on November 7th of 2023. And that potential break, you will hear, was something that didn't even involve the defendant. You're going to hear that Miss Woll had an ex-boyfriend named Jeffrey Herbstman. And you're going to hear that on October 22nd of 2023, the day after Miss Woll's body was found, Mr. Herbstman came in to speak with the police and gave a statement and was cooperative. And he will tell you that the last time that he saw Miss Woll was on October 7th, after seeing her at synagogue. He will tell you that the night of her death, he was home after he returned from synagogue, and he stayed there all night. He will tell you that they dated for about a year, from approximately October of 2022 until July of 2023, but that their breakup was generally amicable. But you will hear that Mr. Herbstman has a history of depression and that he did not take her death well. And on November 7th of 2023, you're going to hear that he was in Kalamazoo for work, and he called the police during what he will describe as a panic attack. And when the police came and questioned him about why he was upset, you will hear that in a frantic state, he told them that he had essentially convinced himself that he may have killed Miss Woll, but he couldn't remember anything about it. And he couldn't articulate why exactly he felt that way. Now, because Mr. Herbstman made that incriminating statement, when he testifies at trial, he's going to testify with something called use immunity. And what use immunity means is we can't force somebody to sit in that witness chair and acknowledge that they previously made an incriminating statement. And so for the hour or so that he's in the witness stand, whatever he says can't be used against him in a future criminal proceeding. But you will hear that what he says is not anything that could be used against him in a future criminal proceeding, because he will tell you that he had absolutely nothing to do with Samantha Woll's death. And he will.
Okay, so use immunity is, I mean, literally every time given to someone who is already been charged in a crime, that they have been charged with someone else in a crime, and that person is given use immunity to testify against another person in a crime. So if you and I did something criminally together and our crime was pretty horrific, okay, but I didn't want to get the, let's say, DP, and you could get the DP or life. Gypsy Rose Blanchard, for instance, she deleted her mother, but she supposedly didn't actually do the deletion. Her boyfriend at the time did the actual deleting part. So Gypsy Rose testified against her boyfriend. And in return, she got 10 years and he got life in prison. Okay? So because she testified against him, she got that use immunity and she got a plea deal. So that's how you get this type of immunity, and you get a plea deal. You're pleading down to a lesser charge so that you can get less time and the other person gets more. Now, Jeffrey Herbstman had nothing to offer the prosecution against Michael. He doesn't know Michael. He doesn't know anything about Michael. He just knows that Michael is taking the fall for what happened to Samantha. And Jeffrey will do whatever it takes to keep himself out of trouble. Now, use immunity does not mean that they can't go after Jeffrey later, because the prosecution isn't stupid. They're not completely dumb. They know that they don't have a real case against Michael Jackson Bolanos, as he stated in the beginning of his opening statement, where he said there is no evidence linking Michael Jackson Bolanos to this crime. You will not find that. We're not going to show you that. They literally say that in their opening statement. So what are they going to do? What can they do when they've had someone who has confessed to doing this crime? What can they do? But because they couldn't find enough evidence, much like they didn't have enough evidence to put Michael Jackson Bolanos there, but they don't have enough evidence to put Jeff there either. Also, they didn't investigate Jeff well enough either. But because they don't have data, because Jeff left his phone at home in airplane mode, and said he was listening to a podcast for 2 hours and then played a record and went to bed and then got up the next day and went to the grocery store. And that's the last tracking they have of him. That's really weird, right? But needless to say, they give Jeff use immunity and say that anything he says on that stand, they can't use against him in future criminal proceedings. So that's a little odd, right? As a juror, wouldn't you be like, that's strange? But because jurors don't normally know the law and they don't understand the law, they're probably just like, oh, okay, that's weird, but okay. Well, you know better than we do. You guys are the lawyers. So this guy thinks he's pulling the wool over the jurors' eyes because, who are they? They're just normal, everyday people who don't have a clue what we're doing. So, yes, Jeffrey can be criminally charged later, but will he be? Because Dana Nessel is the attorney general in Michigan, and Samantha Woll, kind of put her there. So Dana Nessel has no interest in solving Samantha Woll's case. I can tell you that right now.
I'll tell you that when he said what he said on November 7th, he had just gotten an increased dosage of the antidepressant that he was on. He used some cannabis, and he had this one-time delusional panic attack that set in and prompted him to feel what he felt and say what he said. But because he said what he said, he was deemed a suspect, and the police looked into him, and they tried to collect evidence against him. And they had this ambiguous statement from California.
They tried to collect evidence against him. Tried? No. You either collect it or you don't. So they didn't try. They didn't try to do anything. You don't try to collect evidence. That's not a thing. You get it or you don't get it. So what they tried to do was nothing. They didn't do anything with Jeff. And you will find that as we go throughout this trial. You will find how hard they worked to put Michael at the scene and how they didn't do anything to look into Jeff. Not a thing.
Kalamazoo. You're going to hear, though, that the police did not find any evidence placing Jeff Herbstman at the scene the night that Miss Woll was killed. They didn't find his DNA at the scene. They didn't find his fingerprints at the scene. You're going to hear about a lot of video that was collected from surrounding areas. He didn't materialize in any of that video. You're going to hear that they didn't find any evidence that he left his home that night, that his phone placed him at his home the entire night after he returned from synagogue, consistent with his statement. You're going to hear that they searched his cell phone. They downloaded it and forensically extracted at two different points. First on October 22nd when he first came into the police, and then again in Kalamazoo when he was taken into custody after he said what he said, and they didn't find anything incriminating on his phone. You're going to hear that they tore up his car, they tore through his home, and they didn't find any physical evidence connecting Jeff Herbstman to Samantha Woll's death. They found a knife in his car, a pocket knife. It was forensically analyzed. There was nothing relevant found on it. They found a couple of items in his car, including a dog collar that initially tested positive for suspected blood, but it turned out not to be human blood. Samantha Woll's blood did not show up in his house, in his car, on his clothing. And Jeff Herbstman was eventually released and cleared as a suspect. Now, what you will see is that when he was released, it was publicly reported that a suspect was released in this case on November 11th of 2023.
Okay, let me just point out that they did not name a suspect. They did not, once again, they did not say who they had in custody. They did not put Jeff's name all over the news. They didn't put it in the papers. They didn't put it on the internet. They didn't put it anywhere. But as soon as they arrested Michael Jackson Bolanos, his face was everywhere. His name was everywhere. So they did not do the same thing to Jeffrey Herbstman that they did to Michael Jackson Bolanos. So that tells you right there how different they handle things in Wayne County to rich, well, Jewish, white, whatever you want to call him, people than they do to uh, poor Black men who are not as advantaged as Jeffrey Herbstman, because Jeffrey Herbstman actually confessed. Michael Jackson Bolanos didn't know anything about this.
And the very day afterward, it was later found, once the defendant's phone was recovered, that the very day after that news report was made that a suspect had been released, the defendant was searching the internet for how to get out of town. Detroit same-day passport showed up in his search history for that day. Now, while some of the investigation team was focusing on Jeff Herbstman, another part of the investigation team was focusing on the one other major lead that they had, and that is some video from near Miss Woll's home. Near her building, there is an elementary school called Chrysler Elementary School, and that school has a camera that points down Joliet Place. The camera isn't positioned such that you can see Miss Woll's unit or her building, but you can see the parking lot that Joliet Place dead ends into that is close to her building. And when police got a hold of that video, they scoured it. They looked at hours and hours of that footage. And what they found was that at 3:52 a.m. and at 4 a.m., just before that motion was detected in her living room, there was a figure in that parking lot who appeared to be tampering with some cars. Now, this caught investigators' interest because it tended to suggest that here we have someone engaged in criminal activity in the same area of Miss Woll's murder on the same night of her murder. It was also something that caught investigators' interest because that very same night, one of the cars that was parked there, and it's not visible in this still shot, it's just to the left of the green circle where the tree obscures part of the image, but one of those cars had its tire slashed that same night that Miss Woll was stabbed to death. So the police engaged in a colossal effort to pull as much video as they could.
Colossal effort. Do you hear this? Colossal effort to pull as much video. Now, did they do this when they were looking for Jeffrey Herbstman? Did they pull this colossal effort of video footage when they were looking for Jeffrey Herbstman? Did they try that hard to find Jeffrey Herbstman on video as they did for Michael Jackson Bolanos? And did anyone think to ask, he's talking about tire slashing right now. Did anyone think to ask, was there any rubber found in Samantha's body? Were there any traces of tire in Samantha's body, since they're trying to throw this out there and put this in the juror's mind that Michael Jackson Bolanos, which, by the way, this tire slashing has absolutely zero to do with what happened to Samantha, but they're trying to put this in the jury's mind that somehow, some way, because there was a tire slashing, that the tire slashing is associated with what happened to Samantha. So they must be one and the same. But no one ever asked, was there any traces of rubber in Samantha? So all of this colossal effort that they put in to linking Michael Jackson Bolanos to this, when he literally just said in the beginning of his opening statement that there will be zero evidence to link Michael Jackson Bolanos to this crime. And now he's going to throw out there the colossal effort that they had to put together in order to link Michael Jackson Bolanos to the crime.
But from all of the surrounding area, any building they could find that had a camera on it, to try to retrace the footsteps of the individual that they saw tampering with cars in Miss Woll's parking lot. And they pulled video from dozens and dozens of locations. And when they analyzed that video, they got a pretty good sense of what this individual's trajectory was during the night of Miss Woll's murder. And when they were able to identify that individual's position at specific places and at specific times that night, the FBI went to T-Mobile to see whether T-Mobile could identify any cellular devices that were consistent with being in some of those same locations as this individual at the same time as the individual was depicted on video. You see, these phones that we carry around with us, they're constantly interacting with cell towers. Even when we're not making calls, data is being sent back and forth from our phones to cell towers. And our providers, like T-Mobile, keep records of that data. And that data can give investigators a pretty good idea, not a perfect idea, but a pretty good idea of where our phones have been at specific times. And when the FBI worked with T-Mobile to identify devices consistent with following the trajectory of the person identified in the video, they found that there was one device that matched that trajectory, and it was the defendant's phone. And you're going to see through a combination of that cell phone evidence and video, you're going to see the defendant's route that he followed that night. And you will see that at 12:42 a.m., just as Miss Woll's night was ending, as she got home from the wedding, the defendant's night was just getting started. And you're going to see at that time, he left his girlfriend's apartment in Midtown, Detroit. He was wearing a black North Face jacket, dressed all in black. You're going to see that at 1:44 a.m., and in between these two times, 12:42 and 1:44, you're going to see that a combination of video and phone records trace him going from the Midtown neighborhood south into downtown Detroit, across downtown Detroit, and then over to the Lafayette Park neighborhood right near Miss Woll's home. And you're going to see that at 1:44 a.m., he is in that neighborhood. He's just about a block away from her home, and he's still wearing that North Face jacket. And you're going to see that phone data suggested that he stayed right around that area for about 18 minutes on a night when her door was open, the first time he passed through the area that night. You're going to see that at 12:16 a.m., and this comes from materials recovered from his cell phone, that at that point in time, he took a video from inside a secured parking garage at a building called the Ducharme Place Apartments, which is just down the street from Miss Woll's home. He simply took a video of a car and then later texted it to his girlfriend. You're going to see from there, phone records and video then trace him leaving the Lafayette Park neighborhood and going into the Rivertown neighborhood. And then at about 3:05 a.m., he's observed on video going into a parked car and emerging with a white bag. And that white bag is important because in some of the video going forward after this 3:05 a.m. mark, the video is a little grainy and it's hard to see exactly who you're looking at. But you will see that in the grainier video that the person that's being tracked is carrying a white bag. And you will see that the person tampering with the cars in the parking lot right near Miss Woll's home, right before motion was activated in her living room, was carrying a white bag. You're going to see that at 3:12 a.m., video and phone data places him in the Harbortown area where he is observed jumping over a brick wall into another secured parking area to tamper with more cars. You're going to see at 3:24 a.m.
Okay, I just want to point out there is zero video showing him tampering with any cars in that. He's assuming that, and we know what assuming does. Also, he's saying that these times that he's in this area, none of these times he's actually in Samantha Woll's apartment. None of these times he's actually placing him in Samantha Woll's apartment. So he just has Michael Jackson Bolanos walking around the area in this downtown Detroit area. I will tell you that, I have spoken to Tierra, and I know that downtown Detroit, where they live in that area, they both work in that area. They both have to pass Lafayette Park to get to work. Also, they have friends that live over in that area, so they are familiar with the area. So him saying that, he's doing this, that, and the other down there, and then the mention of the grainy video. I also want to mention that Kim Worthy's office says, and she has stated, and it's on her page, that she refuses to allow any prosecutor to prosecute a case off of facial recognition cameras because it is discriminatory to Black and brown people. And if she will not allow prosecutors to prosecute a case using facial recognition cameras because it's discriminatory to Black and brown people, then why in the world would she allow a grainy video to be used to identify someone dressed in all black at night, to identify a person for a red rum case? I mean, that is someone's life on the line. So how is that allowed, but not even a facial recognition? That doesn't even make any sense. But let's go on.
That he crosses back over Jefferson and starts moving toward the Lafayette Park neighborhood again. And at that point, at 3:24 a.m., he's wearing the North Face jacket, he's carrying the white bag, and he's wearing what appear to be blue surgical gloves while walking alone in the middle of the night. From there, you will see that the phone data traces his route back toward the area of the scene, where you will see this individual tampering with cars in the parking lot near Ms. Woll's home. There is a gap in video between 4 a.m. and 4:20, but you will hear from the FBI special agent who mapped the defendant's phone records that during that time, and especially at 4:20, at the very moment that that motion was activated in Samantha Woll's living room, that the defendant's phone was consistent with being right in that area. And in fact, he will tell you that if he had been looking for the defendant in real time at that point, using the data that he has, that's the very first place he would have looked for him. You're going to see that at 4:24 a.m., after that motion ceases in the living room, that the defendant is then on this side of the freeway, on the other side of the freeway, moving away from the scene, still wearing the black North Face jacket, and now wearing what appears to be a gray backpack, something that he acquired along the way. You're going to see that video and phone records then trace him going back to his girlfriend's Midtown apartment, where he arrives and is welcomed by her at about 4:55 a.m., still wearing the gray backpack and the North Face jacket. Now, the police arrested the defendant on November 30th of 2023. And when they arrested him, they had a search warrant to search that apartment, his girlfriend's apartment in Midtown, located at 454 West Alexandrian Street. And when they searched that apartment, they found a North Face jacket. that looked an awful lot like the one he was wearing on video that night. And that North Face jacket was sent to the Michigan State Police Crime Laboratory to be forensically analyzed. And they found that there were 2 spots of blood still on that jacket. And that blood was swabbed and it was tested for comparison with Miss Woll's DNA to see if her DNA was in that blood, to see if that was her blood. And you're going to hear that forensic scientists, when they testify, they don't talk in terms of matches or certainty. They talk in terms of probabilities, scientific probabilities. But what they found was that the probability, the likelihood that that blood on his jacket was Miss Woll's blood was astronomically high. For a swab of the blood from the higher right sleeve, they found that it was 2.2 trillion times more likely to be her DNA in that blood. For a lower right sleeve swab, they found that it was 32 quintillion times more likely to be Samantha Woll's DNA in that blood. 32 quintillion is a number that is so large, it is 32 followed by 18 zeros. Now, when that jacket was found and recovered 6 weeks after Miss Woll's death, there wasn't a lot of blood on it. It wasn't visible to the naked eye. But forensic scientists have tools to locate hard to find blood, to locate blood that could have been concealed in some way. One of those tools they have is something called an alternative light source. It's kind of like a black light. And interesting, you'll see that the defendant searched the internet for the phrase black light sees what? October 31st, just over a week after Samantha Woll's death. You're also going to hear that this particular jacket was washed. Now, you're going to hear that when the defendant was in custody after his arrest, he placed a recorded phone call from the Wayne County Jail to his girlfriend, who's named Tierra White. That's the woman whose apartment he was staying at, the woman who saw him off before he left the night of Miss Woll's murder, the woman who greeted him when he came home. And you will hear on one particular recorded call from the Wayne County Jail that they discussed this jacket. They discussed this jacket. And she told him that she washed the jacket. As they were discussing why there wasn't a lot of blood on the jacket, she told him that she washed the jacket. And as soon as she told him that, you will hear that that call suddenly ended. And you will hear that several minutes later, he called her back and he lashed out at her for saying that. And he said, and I quote, "I don't want to hear what you got to say about that shit." Now, at any rate, when the police arrested the defendant on November 30th, they also searched his vehicle that he was arrested in. And inside the vehicle, they found a backpack that looked a lot like the backpack that he was wearing that night. And that backpack, it turned out, still had some visible blood on it, a small spot, but still visible to the naked eye. That blood was swabbed and sent to the Michigan State Police Crime Laboratory, and they found that it was 20 septillion times more likely to be Samantha Woll's DNA in that blood than somebody else's. And again, that is a number that is so high, it's even bigger than a quintillion. It's 20 followed by 24 zeros. Now, when the defendant was arrested on November 30th of 2023, he was given his Miranda rights and he agreed to make a statement with some detectives. And you're going to hear that during the course of this statement, he provided 4 different versions to them about what his activities were the night of Miss Woll's death. You're going to hear that at first he denied he was engaged in any criminal activity whatsoever. He then claimed that he was out taking pictures of cars for other people to steal, but that he didn't do anything wrong himself. He then claimed he may have tried a couple of car handles, but didn't take anything out of cars, and then finally acknowledged that he broke into cars and broke into parking garages and took things that weren't his to take. You're going to hear that during the first part of this interrogation, that the investigators did not tell him that he was under investigation for a violent crime. They did not tell him that he was under investigation for Samantha Woll's murder. Yet, during that first part of the investigation, he repeatedly volunteered to those detectives, even though there was no mention of violence on their end, that he didn't do anything violent to anybody. He didn't hurt anybody. He didn't rob anybody. And you're going to hear that he had no innocent explanation for that blood that was ultimately found on his jacket and his backpack. He denied seeing any body. He denied seeing any crime scene. He denied seeing anything out of the ordinary whatsoever.
Okay, so you're brought into the police station. You have a criminal record, okay? Your criminal record has been theft in the past, okay? Is the first thing you're going to do is tell the cops who are very aggressive with you in an interrogation that, yeah, I was out stealing. That's what I was doing. Also, when you see the interrogation video, they don't give him a date. They don't ask him, what were you doing on October 21st, 2023? No, that's not how it goes down. Also, as this prosecutor just mentioned, they don't tell him what they're talking to him about. They don't tell him that they're in there accusing him of a violent crime. You're right. He's right. They don't tell him that. So, of course, he's going to be on the defensive. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't doing anything. Your first thing is going to be to deny till you die. That is what you're going to do because you don't want to go back to jail for stealing. That is what you were in there for before. So then when they bring out other stuff, then you're like, oh crap. Okay. All right, fine. I did a couple things. I took some pictures. Okay. That's what I did. All right. So if you are at the police station and you're being questioned for something, but the last thing on your mind is like something this severe because you didn't do that. So you're little by little going to say, okay, I did this. That's fine. I did this, but that I didn't do that. I'm not a part of this kind of stuff. So it's okay for him to little by little. Now he's not changing a story about red rum. He's not changing a story about that. He's not changing his story about being in her house. He's not changing a story about anything like that. He's not changing a story like how that happened or when it happened or anything like that. None of that. He's changing his story as far as what activity he was doing because he's trying to minimize his activities as far as taking pictures of cars or touching car handles or whatever he was doing. But as far as she's concerned, he don't know anything about that. So they're trying to make it seem like he's lying, which he is, but not about that. Okay? Because he has no idea what they're talking about. So, yes, he did lie. But so did the police. The police lied to him. They didn't even tell him who they were. They didn't even tell him what they're talking to him about. They did not tell him anything. They have him trapped in a room and acting like they're talking about something so minor, when the reality is they're talking to him about someone being taken off the face of the earth. And he has no idea. So this guy is making it sound like he is just completely lying about taking someone off the earth. That's not how it happened.
Now, when he was arrested on November 30th of 2023, there were also some knives that were recovered. There was a knife recovered inside his girlfriend's apartment, a pocket knife that was inside of a men's jacket. And there was also a knife that was recovered from his own person when he was arrested. And you're going to hear that when he was originally arrested, he was pulled over in Roseville. And the trooper who placed him under arrest patted him down but didn't find the pocket knife.
That's the trooper.
So he sat there with this trooper on the way downtown for about 30 minutes without letting him know that there was a pocket knife on him.
That's the
It was
trooper's
finally
fault.
recovered once he got into the interview room at police headquarters. And when asked about the knife, the pocket knife that he had on him and why he had it on him, he said that he carried the pocket knife on him as a seatbelt cutter to cut his seatbelt off if he ever got into an accident. He was released on November 30th pending the DNA testing, but when the initial DNA results came back on December 10th, showing the blood on his jacket, he was taken into custody again, and he was questioned again. And again, he had absolutely no innocent explanation for how Samantha Woll's blood got on his clothing. So in sum, ladies and gentlemen, you are going to see that on a night that the victim left her door open, that the defendant was in her neighborhood engaging in crimes of opportunity, that she was stabbed to death that night, and that her blood was still on his clothing weeks later. As a result of this, the defendant has been charged with murder, he's been charged with home invasion, and he's been charged with lying to the police. And at the conclusion of this case, I'm going to ask you to find him guilty of each and every charge. Thank you.
Okay. So he gets to the point finally, right, with the blood, okay, on Michael's jacket and the backpack. It is so minuscule that they had to, they didn't even see it, right? He said you couldn't see it to the naked eye. They had to test it. He even said that a portion of it was so small that they had to see, I think a part of it was barely noticeable to know that it was even Samantha's blood. The other point I want to make is that they worked very, very hard to put this on Michael and did not do any of this type of legwork for Jeffrey, who actually confessed. The only reason they found Michael down there was through his phone records, okay, that he was walking around downtown. It is a far, far stretch to go from checking cars, taking pictures of cars, to suddenly going into a woman's house who he blames for keeping her door open, and suddenly becoming a victim of her own keeping her door open. Now, I want to point out that he's trying to state that Michael did this at 4:20 when her motion sensor shows. They're basing this off an ADT alarm system, okay? The ADT alarm system motion sensor goes off at 4:20 a.m. And then it goes idle at 4:22 a.m. And there is a 2-minute downtime, okay, between 4:20 and 4:22. Now, he did say himself that there's a 12-second delay in the ADT system, okay? So you're telling me that Michael was somehow able to do this to her in 0 seconds, because the alarm system only shows motion. And he also stated that she had door sensors on her front door, her back door, and her basement door. And there's only a motion sensor in the living room area. So she didn't have one upstairs, nothing like that. So you're telling me that Michael just happened upon her open door at 4:20, goes in and takes her out, and then is gone. But there's no motion. So I'm not sure if you all know how an ADT alarm system works, but again, I've said this in my other videos. My boyfriend worked for ADT. The alarm system will show motion, and then if there's no motion for 2 minutes, 1 to 2 minutes, the system will go idle. And it does that, and it did that at 4:22 because there was no motion from 4:20 to 4:22, which means there's zero possibility that Michael could have done it because there was no motion. It caught motion at 4:20, and then nothing else happened after that because it went into idle mode at 4:22. but he's trying to make Michael sound like Superman. So we will go over the defense opening statement so you can hear what Brian Brown is going to use as his defense strategy. But I just want to go through this trial and through their theory piece by piece. And I want to go through witness by witness and break down every single bit of information before I get into what I believe actually happened. Um, and what I know to be true is that Michael Jackson Bolanos did not do this. And why I believe Michael Jackson Bolanos did not do this. And the proof that I feel that I have that there is a major cover up and a lot of politics, money, and power behind this case, and why there is nothing else been said about this case, and why I believe that there needs to be justice for Samantha Woll. And I hope and pray for her family to see that there is something amiss here. Her family are a family of doctors. They are a good family. She was a beautiful person and she did not deserve this. And I hope and pray that her family can see past their grief and realize that there is a a very bad person among their circle, and that there are people among their circle that are trying to suppress this information, and that Jeffrey Herbstman would not have been given use immunity if he hadn't done something and they didn't feel that he would be able to be criminally charged at a later date with evidentiary information. So, why would they give him use immunity to testify on the stand if they didn't feel like later that this case was going to come apart? If they didn't feel like later that Michael Jackson Bolanos was going to be the wrong guy? And what's even sadder about this situation is that the prosecution knew that, and they did it anyway. That they did this anyway, that they charged the wrong guy anyway, just because they had to have it done. They had to close this case because she was such a prominent member of the Detroit area. They had to get this done in a quick, fast, in a hurry fashion in order to quiet the community and continue to allow the synagogue to get where they needed to be, which is where they are now, completely finished. Their rooftop is done. They had their block party on Sunday. They renamed something in the synagogue after Samantha. They have made more money, raised all the money. They're continuing to raise money off of Samantha's face, her voice, her name, her everything. There is something awry about this. And I do believe that this case is going to continue down a very slippery slope if we all don't get together and try to solve it. And there are plenty of YouTube crime people out there, I know, that would find this very interesting and find the corruption that is involved in Michigan from the governor all the way down. So I am hoping and praying that the Woll family can see through the corruption of Dana Nessel, Kim Worthy, Slotkin, Gretchen Whitmer, all of them, because they are not helping that family. They will never help that family solve this. They will continue to feed them the lies and all of this garbage. And I know they want closure or whatever you want to call it. I hate it being called closure, but I know they want this solved. And I know they truly believe that Michael Jackson Bolanos did this because that is the narrative that they have been fed. But if they could actually look at the timeline and see for themselves how the ADT alarm system works. And if they could have just had the autopsy done, if they could have just finished the autopsy, completed the autopsy, for God's sake, if there had been an estimated time of death put on the autopsy, instead of this garbage ADT system, they would know what happened to her. There isn't even a cause of death. It is literally just homicide. There isn't even a cause of death. Which wound caused her death? What happened to her? They have nothing. There's no answers. They're doctors. Come on. Like, be doctors and understand that an ADT alarm system is not what bases your time of death. It doesn't solve a crime. And I'm sorry, but there is video out there of another person. So we're going to go through this bit by bit until everyone has asked all the questions they need to ask, and we come up with all the answers we can come up with, because I am not going to finish. I'm not going to stop working on this case until it is solved and Samantha Woll gets justice and Michael Jackson Bolanos' name is cleared, period. Because this is a mess and it's happening everywhere. And it's happening a lot in Michigan. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Michigan incarcerates more people than any other Democratic country. They also have 54% of their people that are incarcerated are not even convicted of a crime. They're just sitting there waiting. So much for innocent until proven guilty. And that is on Governor Whitmer's watch. That is on Attorney General Dana Nessel's watch. That is on Kim Worthy's watch, who continues to run unopposed. It's disgusting. It is disgusting. Michigan, you need to get your stuff together. You need to stop voting for these people. You need to get somebody up there that can stand up and fight for your state and get Wayne County and Detroit back on track, because this is happening to you guys. Vote. Register to vote and vote the right way. Stop falling for this garbage. Stop complaining about it and start voting about it. That's all I can tell you. I don't know what's going on, but if they are going to allow illegal immigrants to vote, then they should allow felons to vote. And I bet you $1 million if felons could vote, they sure as hell wouldn't vote for Kim Worthy. And they sure as hell wouldn't vote for Dana Nessel or Gretchen Whitmer or Slotkin. That would not happen. So we're going to start from jump, from the beginning. This narrative is not right. This is not right. This is their narrative. They're trying to shove down your throat, shove down the Woll family's throat, and they have convinced the Woll family, but I am not convinced. No. We're going to keep investigating until we figure this out. So I appreciate everyone. I thank you so much for watching my channel, subscribing to my channel. Please hit that like button. Please subscribe. Please share. Please buy me a coffee on the buymeacoffee.com at Racy0000. You can also cash at me. I have merch coming out. Thank you so much to LaDonna and China for buying their first shirts that have come out. And I also want to wish one of my viewers a happy birthday. Her birthday was last Friday, and I didn't get to mention it to her yesterday. So happy birthday, Brandy. And I hope you all watch this to the end so that you could hear your shout outs. If you don't watch it to the end, you don't get to hear your shout outs. So thank you so much. I appreciate everyone so very much. And I will see you in the next video. 감사합니다.